am an ordinary full-time London office worker, mother of 2 boys and carer for my sick husband. 2 years ago, after a year of personal disasters, I was told some devastating news and went into a panic.
Open the door, it's the police! I looked through the peephole and saw some strangers. One appeared to be holding a machine gun. I shrunk back in horror. My 16-year-old son shouted to me over the intruder alarm, "Let them in!" I screamed back, "They're not the police, they're going to kill us!" "Open the door or we will break it down!" We huddled in fear as they broke down the door. I braced myself to die. My son was wrenched from me and out of the flat. Handcuffs were clamped on my wrists. One of the strangers rummaged around in my handbag and pulled out my car keys and threw them over to his accomplice. They told me they were going to take me outside. Once outside, I broke from their grasp and ran down the street shouting, "Call the police! They're not the police!" They caught me and manhandled me into a van, bruising my side and cutting my legs. I was terrified, fearing they were going to kill me elsewhere. Eventually, we stopped at a hospital, and to my relief I was let out and led shaking into a plain room. I was offered a cup of tea and felt safer, though still shaken. After a few hours, 4 men and a woman came into the room. They did not say who they were, but I assumed them to be the police, and I told them about how I'd found out about the people who'd been stealing from my family behind our backs, and that I was scared they would harm us. They listened intently and said they would like to keep me in overnight. I assumed I was being offered police protection.
I was taken to the local mental hospital and without my knowledge was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. I tried to escape from the hospital 3 times. Unfortunately, by trying to escape, I was considered more disturbed.
When I was in St Charles Hospital, I stayed in room number 13, which is on the 2nd floor, and right by this tree. The tree is very close to it, and I was trying to break open the window so that I would be able to jump to the tree and climb down. It's scary when you're in a mental hospital because no one believes you, and you know they can do what they like with you. And the nurse shouted at me, "I can keep you for 28 days. Well, this may be even more distressing.
I looked around in panic and I saw a red button on the wall. I moved towards it and the woman leered, "Yes, press the red button." So I knew that would be a mistake. Suddenly, the lunch trolley came through the locked door. I took my chance and ran through it and down 4 flights of stairs with them in hot pursuit. At the bottom, I could not see the way out, and then the lift doors opened and more pursuiters poured out. I ran back up the stairs, but only got up 1 flight before I was surrounded. 2 people came in through the exit, which I'd been unable to find, and I cried out to them for help. Suddenly, I was grabbed from behind with such force that I felt my right arm break. I screamed out, "You've broken my arm! You've broken my arm!" Ignoring my cries, they pulled me down the stairs and into the lift to go back up to the 2nd floor. They then dragged me by my broken arm into my room and slammed the door shut. I was terrified about what they were going to do next. I sat by the open window, crying, cradling my broken arm.
They broke my right arm in 2 places and refused treatment for over 14 hours despite my pleas.
This is the stairwell where they broke my arm on the first day of my admission. There were a team following me behind. There was some come in the lift. There's a lift there, and they came out of the lift. When they came out of the lift, I realised I had to get away from them. I started to go back up the stairs, and the nurse said, "Yes, go back up the stairs." And I realised that was a mistake, and of course I got trapped on the first landing there. At that point, everybody froze. We all stood there looking at each other. Suddenly, they all made a grab for me, and one nurse grabbed me by my arm here, squeezed very hard, and I felt the bone go. It was the ulna. I felt it go, just felt it, and I screamed out, "You've broken my arm, you've broken my arm." They totally ignored me. They dragged me by my broken arm, back down the stairs, into the lift. all the time in the lift. There were lots of people in the lift, lots of people were in the stairwell. All the time I was holding my arm like this going, "You've broken my arm, you've broken my arm." I was really distressed. They said nothing to me. They bundled me out of the lift to the second floor, took me back onto the ward, then tried to take me to my room, which was down a dead end. I was really scared because I thought, God, they're going to beat me up now. I tried to stop them dragging me into the room. Apparently they were pushing me, pulling me, my arm obviously broken. I actually put my legs in the doorway to try and stop them dragging me into the room, but they both got hold of my legs, bundled me in the room, slammed the door shut. I think they locked it, I'm not sure, but I was in there absolutely terrified. I had a broken arm, I was absolutely terrified, I didn't know what to do. The psychiatrist came into my room. Now, she didn't tell me who she was, she didn't say, "I'm your psychiatrist," she didn't say anything, she just said, all she said was something like, "How are you?" And I was crying, obviously, a broken arm, and terrified, but she looked kindly, so I said to her, "They've broken my arm." And she turned to some people in the doorway and said, "We must get that seen to." But then she went away, and then I was left alone on my own, too terrified to come out until about 5 o'clock. So I was in there 5 hours with a broken arm, scared. Well, I'm holding my arm like this because this was the least painful way of holding my arm. If I put it down like this, it was absolute agony, so I was like this the whole time. About 11 o'clock, another doctor came on. This is when my arm was broken. He shouted at me. He was saying, we can't take you for an x-ray. They'd have to take me off site. We can't take you for an x-ray because you've tried to escape and you tried to abscond, and we can't take the risk, and we can't just put you in an ambulance. We have to get a special car and 2 people to accompany you. And he just went on and on like this. And I started crying. I just said, "My arm is broken." I'm just crying. And I said to the doctor, "Can I have some painkillers for my arm?" Which he gave me 2 pink pills. Then he went away. When I went back to my room, and I kept coming out, and the taxi hadn't come, and I kept saying to the nurse, "When's the taxi coming?" And "Are you just messing me around? Are you not really going to get a taxi? Because if you're not going to get one, I'd rather go to sleep so I can get up early in the morning, so then to ask for a taxi again." And eventually, about 2:15 in the morning, so we're talking another 3.5 hours after I saw the last doctor, 2:15 in the morning, eventually a taxi arrived to St Mary's Hospital, and I told the doctors there that my arm had been broken by the staff. I don't know if they wrote it down. And they x-rayed me and found it was broken in 2 places. And I was put in a plaster cast and then went back to the hospital. So all the way to the hospital in the taxi, the nurse was saying to me, "Your arm's not really broken, it's not broken," like this. So anyway, and the funny thing is, when I went back to get the plaster redone, you could actually see the fingerprints on my arm, because they'd come out by then, the bruises where the person had squeezed me. And I wish I'd got photographs taken then. It seemed afterwards they were trying to dispute the fact that it had happened. When I got back to my room, my bed was missing, just a mattress on the floor remained, which I sat on weeping with helplessness and fear. Shortly afterwards, a crowd of people burst into my room. One of them told me to take some unknown pills. I refused, so they injected me in the bottom. Fearing it was a fatal injection, I said the Lord's Prayer out loud while I slipped into unconsciousness. When I awoke, I was surprised to find I was still alive. Being unconscious, I'd missed a visit from my husband and son. I thought I was being held by criminals due to lack of communication and the abusive treatment I received.
They injected me against my will with a tranquilizer, which knocked me out all day. They started me on a regime of addictive tranquilizers and dangerous antipsychotic drugs, again against my will. Then a nurse threatened me with electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, electroshock to the brain, and said they did it all the time. I was terrified, as I knew it deletes part of your memory and affects your cognition.
This is where the ECT unit is located in St Charles Hospital. People come here, I think they do it on Mondays and Wednesdays in the morning. Most of it without consent, and mainly elderly women. I just can't believe it can be done in this day and age. I really can't believe anyone could sensibly think it's a good idea. It's just obvious. I mean, you wouldn't put an electric current across the hard drive of your computer, would you? We've got surge protectors to stop that kind of thing happening. So why would you do that to the brain, which, as someone said, is like a fetus floating in a liquid? You wouldn't do that to a fetus. You shouldn't do it to the brain. Delicate brain, lots of connections, override the electrics. When the police took me here to a hospital, I was quite relieved. I thought, thank God, I'm safe. I'm in a hospital, I am safe. And when they let me out of the police van, I collapsed because I was just so relieved that I was safe. Unfortunately, I was not safe, which I found out later. A nurse called me over into the dining room, and she had 2 pills, and she said to me, take these pills. Well, I didn't know what they were, and I didn't want to take them. But since before, when I refused pills, they injected me against my will, so I thought this was going to be a bit tricky. So I needed to create a diversion, so I said to her, oh, what are they? And she didn't know. So she then went off to try and find out what they were, and while she was gone, I quickly took the 2 pills and tipped them in my handbag. And when she came back, she saw they were missing, and I said, oh, I've taken them already. And then I didn't want to carry on the conversation in case it got tricky, so then I quickly left, and so I got away with it. Then the next day, I was called over to take some more pills at the actual pharmacy hatch. And I said to the person, oh, I've already had my pills, because I didn't know that they keep records. So, of course, then later on, a nurse came up to me and said, why did you lie? You haven't taken your pills. You mustn't lie. You'll never get better unless you take the pills. And so I thought, oh, God. So, oh, okay. And I had to take the pills then. But I tried to hide them in my mouth somewhere and not swallow them. Of course, then, because I'd shown reluctance at taking the pills, they then wanted to look in my mouth. And luckily, I put the pills in my cheek, and they actually looked in under my tongue, which the pills weren't. So I got away with that. I quickly ran away from the station. So after that, I realised it was a good idea to pretend that I really wanted the drugs, and then they wouldn't be so suspicious. So the next time I just took the drugs, and then as soon as I went away from the nurse's station, I had a tissue in my hand and I would take them out. Because one of them was one of those Velatabs which dissolve on the tongue, so that's quite difficult because they dissolve quite quickly, but I used the tissue to get rid of as much as I could. But I mean, I was terrified the whole time I was in there that they would realise I wasn't taking the pills, and since I didn't know how you act with the pills, it was a bit tricky. And so I tried to sort of act a little bit doped up, but one of the patients kind of put me right about that because he'd seen me spitting the pills out, so he knew I wasn't taking them. So he was trying to hint to me that I didn't need to look that bad. Of course, then when I left the hospital, I was allowed out on leave for about 5 or 6 days, and they had someone come around my house to check I was taking the pills. Just as I was going to be released from the hospital, had to go back for the tribunal, and the psychiatrist had a suspicion from the crisis team that I hadn't been taking the drugs. So she said to me, were you taking them when you were out on leave? And I didn't know what to say. She said, oh, you can tell me the truth. So I said, okay, I wasn't taking the pills. And I wasn't taking them in the hospital either. But I was really worried about saying that, because I thought, well, should I tell the truth that I wasn't taking them, or should I lie? I thought, if I lie and say I was taking them, then they'll think, oh, they did her good, she needs to be on them. If I tell the truth and I say, well, I wasn't taking them at all, then if ever I got dragged back in that place, they would damn well make sure I did take them. It wasn't that I thought I was sick or anything, because I knew I wasn't sick. I knew that I was in a bad situation. That's all I knew. And who could I trust? I didn't know who I could trust at that point. So glad I never took those pills. I'm just so glad. God, that was so close. If I had taken those pills, I would have started, well, it would have slowed my thought down for a start, and by the time the ward round came round a week later, I wouldn't have been functioning, probably, not very well, and I would have just looked like a mental patient, drugged up, and, you know, that would have been terrible. And then the other thing is, when I came out, if I'd stopped taking them, I would have got those withdrawal symptoms. And they probably would have kept me in there. It seemed like they had a standard 2 weeks they kept people in there. So they could drug you up for 2 weeks, and then they would probably turf you out under the crisis team, give you a prescription, keep you on those drugs. You wouldn't know any different. And then one day, if you did try and come off the drugs, you'd get the withdrawal symptoms, and you would think, oh my God, I do need these drugs. And that's it, you'd be a mental patient for life. One thing I was worried about those drugs, I didn't know what they were going to do to me. And if I was out of control, then they would have more power over me, and they would be able to do what they like more than they were already. So I was very worried about that. Especially, some of the nurses, I was worried if I was drugged up, what would they do to me? I was in fear the whole time I was in there. I don't know if you can imagine 8 days of absolute terror. That's what I had in there. I tried to put on a brave face. I didn't want them to see I was terrified, but sometimes I couldn't hide the fact I was terrified.
By locking me up, they made a bad situation worse. My sister visited the next day, and 2 days later told my employer where I was, 5 days after I'd been taken from my flat. They immediately went into action and arranged a lawyer who secured my temporary release, which became final minutes before the tribunal hearing. This was on the day I was due to fly on holiday with my family, which I had to cancel. My stay in that hospital was the worst 8 days of my life. I had a lucky escape. My agony was not over though, as I was in an elbow plaster cast for 9 weeks. I also had to fight the hospital for what they did. They settled out of court, but I'm pursuing the complaint via the Health Ombudsman. I have also joined a couple of mental health activist groups, Mind Freedom International and Speak Out Against Psychiatry. I also campaigned for the abolition of electroconvulsive therapy, which they threatened me with in the hospital.
When this happened to me, my 2 boys were 19 and 16, and the 16-year-old actually turned 17 when I was in the hospital. I couldn't contact him because by then the nurses had stolen my phone, so that was quite upsetting on his birthday. My oldest son suddenly had to take responsibility for everything because my husband was ill, which was a strain on him, and he was supposed to be going into clearing for university. The youngest son was terribly affected. by the whole situation. He did text me when I was in the hospital saying, please come home, I don't want you in there. I didn't get that text because they'd stolen my phone, but he then thought I'd received it and didn't reply, so that was quite bad. Terribly affected afterwards. He actually stopped going to school because he was worried that while he was at school they might come and take me away. And he wouldn't talk about it for, well, months. He just couldn't even talk about it, what happened. Oldest son brought the younger one to see me, even though he didn't want to come. He was very distressed. And in fact, when I saw them together, I went towards my youngest son and he drew away because he was so upset. This was the same day that I'd been injected. I was looking quite drugged up. I had the broken arm at that point as well, so there he saw me looking dishevelled, broken arm. I had a hospital gown on because they had to take my blouse off, so I was looking pretty ropey. It hurt me that the hospital had done this to me, which had done this to them. Staying in this hospital, they'd taken away my peace of mind. Before this happened to me, I had faith in the psychiatric system. I knew nothing about it really. I didn't really think about it. I just thought what everyone else thought, you know, mentally ill people need to be maybe locked up, drugged. I had no idea. I had no idea what went on. After this, what happened to me, I was just completely shocked. I was just shocked about how the nurses behaved, how the doctors behaved. Psychiatrists didn't seem to be doing anything. And the more I've read since I've come out, you know, I realise that a lot of the things that the psychiatrists are told about in their training is actually untrue. That a lot of these trials are untrue. The pharmaceutical companies have got a really big say in everything. And it's quite scary. It's quite scary. These people can they can do what they like with you. And what they're doing is wrong. And if you say it's wrong, then you're mentally ill and you have no insight. But in actual fact, they're the ones that are wrong. In my situation, there were a lot of communication errors, and I was the one that suffered in the end. I suffered because of their incompetence. They didn't follow procedures. They weren't very caring. And in the end, it was me that suffered. And the complaints procedure was so bad. It's been going on. It's still going on now. And this is like 2.5 years later. Anybody that's really mentally ill would not be able to cope with this. It's really stressful having to live through it all the time. When I wake up in the morning, I think about it. What happened to me in that place? I'll never forget it. They've just taken away my peace of mind. And I fear for myself if I ever end up in that place again, or even for my children. I think nobody's safe. You're not safe in those places. It could happen to anyone. It could happen to you.
I had my arm broken in the same hospital.
She's had her arm broken in the same hospital.
I wasn't as lucky as you because I wasn't wherewithal at the time.
Yeah.
So if they'd followed procedures in the very beginning, I'm sure I wouldn't have been taken in the hospital. If people had actually asked right questions and told me information, it could have all been sorted out there and then. I wouldn't have been admitted to hospital. They wouldn't have broken my arm. I wouldn't then have been terrified as hell. The whole thing could have been avoided. I was in that hospital and I was sane and I was scared. I was sane, but I was scared. I mean, what's it like if you're actually having a psychotic episode and you're really scared and you're in that place? I mean, you'd be doubly scared. I can't imagine it. I mean, nobody was like kind. Nobody reassured me. Nobody asked me what was troubling me. Nothing, you know. It was awful. Really awful.